Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on, well, a pretty ambitious intellectual journey. We're going to be doing an exhaustive investigation into some historical blueprints for human perfection.
That's right. Our source is a fascinating collection called Ideal Empires and Republics. It basically gives us a direct line into the thinking of four really foundational figures in utopian governance: Thomas More, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Francis Bacon, and Tommaso Campanella.
And our mission here for you listening is, I think, pretty crucial if you're interested in political philosophy at all. We want to cut through the often optimistic surface of these ideal states.
To really confront the central paradox. And it's a paradox that's frankly a bit terrifying when you dig into it. It seems that this constant quest for absolute perfection, for total efficiency, for complete equality,
it always seems to demand the same thing in return.
Exactly. Yeah. The absolute suppression of individual liberty, of privacy, of, well, what makes us individuals.
It really is the ultimate trade-off, isn't it? And it's a critique, as the sources show, that didn't just spring out of nowhere. These writers weren't just, idly dreaming up fantasy islands.
Not at all. They were reacting quite strongly to the realities of their own times. We're talking post-Middle Ages corruption, where governments often became, let's face it, tyrannical. Social relations were seen as unjust, even immoral.
So they felt they couldn't just look back to some mythical golden age or religious age of innocence. That wasn't cutting it anymore.
Right. They believed they had to actively design a better future. Almost like architects. They projected their ideals into these highly structured, what the introduction calls romantic or ideal forms. And these blueprints, these visions, became incredibly influential for centuries.
And for this deep dive, we're focusing on four key works chosen for their lasting impact and, frankly, their literary quality, too. Especially More's Utopia, often called the first modern work of its kind, really setting the stage back in 1516.
And of course, Rousseau's Social Contract. It's hard to overstate its influence on political thought, particularly around the revolutions in the 18th century.
Okay, so let's dive into that foundational conflict. The one that seems to kick off so much utopian thinking, economic inequality, and maybe the corruption that comes from private desires. Let's start with Thomas More's Utopia.
Right. So More is writing in the early 16th century, and England at that time was facing, well, a real crisis. He paints a pretty grim picture of the social chaos.
What was happening specifically?
Well, the old medieval manorial system was basically falling apart. You had landlords enclosing common lands, land everyone used to share, mostly to raise sheep because wool was becoming profitable.
Ah, the infamous enclosures.
Exactly. And the result was that huge numbers of people were suddenly pushed off the land. They had no work, nowhere to go. They became vagrants, essentially. Mass unemployment, mass poverty.
And More saw the legal system's response as lacking.
Worse than lacking. He saw it as fundamentally immoral. He has this scathing critique of capital punishment for theft. He describes seeing the unemployed, people driven to steal just to survive, being hanged in huge numbers. Sometimes, he says, 20 on one gibbet.
That's horrifying. And he saw a logical flaw in it too, didn't he? Beyond just the cruelty.
Yes, a deeply practical flaw. He argues executing people for theft is, quote, neither just in itself nor good for the public.
Why not good for the public?
Because of the perverse incentive it creates. If the punishment for stealing a loaf of bread is death, and the punishment for murder is also death, well, what does that encourage the thief to do if there's a witness?
Eliminate the witness. It actually makes murder more likely.
Precisely. As More's character puts it, there's more security and less danger of discovery when he that can best make it is put out of the way. The law itself was pushing people towards greater violence.
So More traces this all back. The greed, the crime, the social breakdown. He traces it back to one core problem.
Private property. For More, that's the root of it all. It's the source of greed, luxury, inequality, and ultimately the sin of pride, which he saw as the chief vice. Eliminate private ownership, he thought, and you cut off the source of the corruption.
Which leads to that famous, almost paradoxical utopian economic principle.
Right. Though no man has anything, yet they are all rich. It sounds contradictory, but the logic is key.
How does that work? They're rich because...
Because the community takes care of everyone. The public storehouses are always full. Since everyone trusts that their needs will always be met, food, clothing, shelter, there's simply no incentive to hoard or to ask for more than you actually need.
So scarcity isn't overcome by producing more stuff necessarily, but by sharing everything.
Exactly. Shared abundance eliminates the fear of scarcity, which in turn eliminates the drive for excessive accumulation.
But, okay, putting that into practice, that requires an incredible amount of social engineering, doesn't it? Daily life must be heavily regulated.
Oh, absolutely. It's regimented down to the details. Take labor, for instance. Moore lays out this strictly controlled structure.
Everyone has to work.
Pretty much. Men and women alike. His calculation is quite clever. First, you get rid of all the vain and superfluous trades, anything that just supports luxury or vice. Think about how many jobs that would be, even then.
Goldsmiths, maybe certain kinds of fashion.
Exactly. Then, you make sure everyone who can work does work, but only on necessary things, and only for a reasonable amount of time, 6 hours a day, I think he suggests. The result: very little labor time is actually needed per person.
Leaving time for leisure.
And study. That's crucial for Moore. Only a small number, maybe 500 per city, are permanently exempt from physical labor to dedicate themselves to learning. But even the leaders, the magistrates, the priests, they set an example by doing physical work too. It's not seen as demeaning.
It sounds efficient, like a well-oiled machine. But that efficiency seems to come directly at the expense of anything resembling a private life.
It completely dissolves the private sphere. That's the point. All the major activities are done communally. Eating, for example. Everyone eats together in these huge public halls.
Who oversees all this?
Locally, they have officials called suffragants. Think of them as elected neighborhood leaders. But their main job isn't grand policy. It's maintaining order and tranquility at the ground level, overseeing these communal meals, making sure everyone's behaving.
So, very little privacy.
Virtually none. And that's by design. It removes the opportunity for secret hoarding, for plotting, for any kind of individual indulgence that might disrupt the harmony. This extends even to housing.
Right. The houses aren't privately owned either.
Not only that, families have to swap houses every 10 years. They draw lots.
That detail is amazing. It explicitly prevents people from developing that sense of, this is my ancestral home, that pride in ownership that Moore saw as so problematic.
It's a systematic deprivatization of space, of ambition, even of desire itself. And this control moves from physical property right into morality and even appearance. You see this in Moore's famous satire on how utopians view gold.
Ah, yes, the gold chamber pots, always a memorable image.
And shackles for slaves. They deliberately associate gold and silver with the most base and degrading uses. They give jewels to children as playthings, things they'll discard as they grow up.
So when European ambassadors show up dripping in gold chains and jewels,
the utopians just laugh. They assume these gaudily dressed people must be the ambassadors' fools or slaves, because who else would wear such degrading materials? They've engineered desire by collapsing the value system that supports luxury.
But this control isn't just symbolic, it extends to physical movement too, right? You can't just wander off.
Definitely not. If you want to travel even just outside your own city, you need official permission. A passport, signed by the prince, specifying when you have to be back.
And if you just go for a walk without permission, unauthorized rambling,
that's severely punished. The idea is that a citizen needs to be accounted for. Someone outside the system, untracked, is a potential source of disruption or corruption. Absolute predictability is key.
And even most private decisions, like marriage, are brought under this rational communal control, the premarital viewing.
The viewing of the potential spouse naked, yes. It sounds incredibly crude to us, but Moore presents it with his cold, utilitarian logic.
What's the rationale?
He argues, look, people are so careful when buying a horse, they inspect every part of it. But for a spouse, someone you live with forever, they only see a tiny bit of the face and risk discovering some hidden deformity or disease later. It's about ensuring the health and suitability of partners for the good of the community, essentially turning marriage into a pragmatic contract for producing healthy citizens.
Extremely pragmatic, and the consequences for breaking that contract, like adultery.
They're severe. First offense is slavery. If you relapse, it's death. And what's really telling about utopian law is that intent matters as much as the act itself. The deliberate design to commit a crime, Moore says, is equal to the fact itself. Just planning something destructive is seen as a betrayal of the entire communal foundation, which relies on goodwill and transparency.
So the picture Moore paints is Well, it's stark. You get equality, you get security, everyone's basic needs are met. But the price is constant surveillance, communal living, whether you like it or not, and the total erasure of private property and arguably private passion.
That's the trade-off More puts on the table. Absolute social predictability in exchange for basic survival and equality.
Okay, let's jump forward then. About 2.5 centuries after More, we get to Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his social contract. Here, the focus shifts, right? It's less about economics and property.
And much more about pure political structure, about legitimacy. Rousseau is obsessed with finding a form of association, a state where every law, every act of governance is fundamentally just and legitimate, where obedience is also a form of freedom.
And he starts, like many political thinkers, from the state of nature. What's his take on it?
His premise is that individuals in the state of nature eventually reach a point where the obstacles to their survival are greater than their individual power to overcome them. Left alone, they'll perish.
So they have to band together.
They must. They need to aggregate their forces, as he puts it, create a common power to protect everyone's person and goods. This necessity is what forces them into the social pact, the social contract.
And the core clause of this contract. This is where it gets really intense and maybe counterintuitive for us today.
It is. The fundamental clause demands, and this is his wording, the total alienation to the whole community of each associate with all his rights.
Total alienation. That sounds terrifying. It sounds like giving up everything, like absolute submission.
On the surface, yes. But Rousseau's argument is subtle. He claims this is the only way to ensure true equality and prevent the tyranny of some over others. Because everyone gives up all their rights equally, and because they give them up to the entire community of which they are a part, no single individual gains power over anyone else.
So I give up my rights, but I simultaneously gain the same rights over everyone else, mediated through the community.
Exactly. You lose your natural rights, but you gain civil rights as part of the collective. This act of total alienation creates what he calls a moral and collective body. And this body has a single will.
The general will?
The general will. This is the absolute core of Rousseau's thought.
And what's the payoff for the individual in this exchange? Why would anyone agree to this total alienation?
According to Rousseau, the gain is immense. You trade your precarious, uncertain natural independence for a better and more assured one. You swap raw instinct for justice. You're transformed, he says, from a stupid and ignorant animal into an intelligent being and a man. You achieve moral freedom.
Moral freedom through collective submission.
It's freedom through obedience to a law that you yourself have helped create as part of the sovereign community, expressing the general will. That's the key. Civic freedom is obedience to the general will, which means we absolutely have to understand the difference he draws between this general will and what he calls the will of all.
Right. This distinction trips people up, but it's crucial for seeing how this system justifies its absolute control. Can you break down these two concepts?
Okay. The will of all is simply the sum total of everyone's private selfish interests. Imagine an election where everyone votes purely for what benefits them personally, lower taxes for me, subsidies for my industry, etc. Add all those votes up, and you get the will of all. It's just a jumble of particular desires.
Okay, so what's the general will then?
The general will is different. It only considers the common interest, the good of the community as a whole. Rousseau says it's what's left when you take the will of all and cancel out the pluses and minuses. All the purely selfish interests neutralize each other, and what remains is the unified will that aims solely at the public good.
So the general will is inherently right, by definition. It is the common good.
By definition, yes. It always tends towards the public advantage. The problem is the people themselves expressing the will of all might not always perceive it correctly. Their private interests can cloud their judgment.
So the general will is like this abstract truth residing within the collective, but the collective itself might be mistaken about what it is at any given moment.
Precisely. And this collective body, the sovereign, which is the people acting as this unified whole, must therefore be absolutely powerful. It cannot bind itself with unchangeable laws, not even the original social contract itself.
Why not?
Because that would be like an individual trying to make a binding contract with himself. It doesn't make sense. The sovereign must always be free to act for the common good, as dictated by the general will, without past constraints. Its power must be absolute to remain legitimate and effective.
Okay, but this sounds like a perfect recipe for suppressing any dissent. If the general will is always right and the sovereign has absolute power to enact it, then anyone who disagrees, They must be simply wrong, right? Their disagreement comes from private interest, corrupting the pure will.
That's exactly the implication. And it leads directly to Rousseau's strong condemnation of factions, or what he calls partial associations, political parties, special interest groups.
Why are they so dangerous in his view?
Because they destroy the process of finding the general will. Ideally, each citizen votes based only on their own understanding of the common good. These individual differences, the pluses and minuses, cancel out. But when people form factions, they start voting as a bloc, according to the faction's interest.
So instead of many individual voices canceling out selfishness, you get a few big, powerful blocks of private interest.
Right. The number of voters effectively shrinks to the number of associations, and their combined private interests can easily overwhelm and distort the general will. That's why, for Rousseau, a healthy republic needs few or no factions.
But if the people are often a blind multitude, as he sometimes calls them, unable to see the true general will on their own, and if factions are forbidden, how does the state get the right laws? How is this perfect vision implemented?
This leads to one of the most striking and frankly problematic figures in Rousseau's system, the legislator.
The legislator. This isn't just any politician, is it?
Not at all. This is an almost mythical figure. Rousseau says the task of creating the foundational laws for a people requires a superior intelligence, someone practically godlike. This figure must be willing to undertake the monumental task of, well, essentially changing human nature.
Changing human nature, that sounds incredibly radical, even more than more.
It is. The legislator's job is to take natural man, who is independent and focused on himself, and transform him into a citizen, a part of the whole. To substitute, as Rousseau puts it, a partial and moral existence for the physical and independent existence we receive from nature. It's the ultimate social engineering project.
How does this legislator actually get people to accept these laws that are supposedly changing their very nature, especially if the people are blind?
Well, they can't just use force, and they can't rely on rational argument alone because the people won't understand the long-term benefits yet. So the legislator has to find ways to compel without violence and persuade without convincing.
How on earth do you do that?
Rousseau suggests the legislator often has to resort to claiming divine authority, attributing the laws to the gods, using religious language and ceremony to give the laws a sacred weight that bypasses rational debate. It's a kind of noble lie or necessary propaganda to get the state off the ground.
So perfect political justice requires a genius legislator who might need to employ a kind of sacred manipulation.
That seems to be the implication. And Rousseau adds another constraint, scale. He argues strongly against large states.
Why? What's wrong with a large republic?
He believes administration becomes too burdensome over vast territories. The social bonds weaken. Laws lose their vigor when they're applied too far from the center. The government has to spend more resources just managing itself, exhausting the subjects. A small state, he argues, is proportionally much stronger and easier to govern according to the general will.
So the ideal state for Rousseau is small, tightly knit, homogeneous, free of factions, and guided by an almost superhuman lawgiver. The price of this perfect political justice seems to be the elimination of pluralism, dissent, and maybe even large-scale societies.
It really involves the crushing of individuality in favor of an abstract collective good, defined and enforced by an absolute sovereign.
Okay, so we've seen economic control in More and political control in Rousseau. Now we turn to Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, and the emphasis shifts again, this time towards science.
Exactly. Bacon's vision, written in the early 17th century, presents a society, Bensalem, where perfection isn't achieved through communism or a social contract, but through the total mastery of nature, guided by a centralized scientific authority. It's order through knowledge.
And the heart of this is an institution, right? Solomon's house.
Solomon's house is everything in Bensalem. Bacon calls it the noblest foundation that ever was on earth. Its sole purpose is discovering the causes and secret motions of things and expanding the bounds of the human empire over nature. It's not just a university, it's the engine and the brain of the entire state. All power ultimately flows from his knowledge.
And the scope of their research, as Bacon describes it, is just astonishing for his time. It sounds almost futuristic.
It really does. He goes into incredible detail. They have high towers, half a mile high, for studying weather winds, snow, hail, implying things like weather prediction, maybe even control.
Meteorology as a state function? What else?
They have deep caves for producing artificial metals and conserving bodies. They have artificial wells and fountains and special waters, some designed explicitly for the prolongation of life.
Wow. The state literally promising longer life through science.
And the technology is equally advanced. He talks about sound houses, where they experiment with acoustics, creating echoes, magnifying sounds, even transmitting sounds through pipes over distances. They practice quarter sounds and lesser slides, which sounds remarkably like experimenting with microtones or advanced audio manipulation.
And transportation.
Movement. Oh, yes. Engine houses, where they have machines that produce incredible force, exceeding cannons, devices for flying in the air, ships and boats for going underwater. It's a technological wonderland, all driven by this state-controlled scientific body.
But the key here seems to be that this knowledge, this power, is highly centralized and secret.
Absolutely secret. That's fundamental to how Bensalem operates. They maintain their ideal state, partly through isolation. They know everything about the rest of the world. They send out spies, essentially, to gather information. But the outside world knows absolutely nothing about Bensalem.
So they control the flow of information completely.
Yes. This prevents contamination from what they see as the morally corrupt and less advanced outside world. It maintains their purity, both intellectually and morally.
And this secrecy extends even to how they acquire new knowledge from abroad. The trade for light.
That's a perfect example. It sounds very noble. They send out members of Solomon's house, the Brethren, every 12 years on secret missions. They travel undercover, pretending to be from other nations. And their mission, Bacon says, is not for gold, silver, or jewels, but only for God's first creature, which was light. They're gathering books, inventions, scientific data from across the globe.
So knowledge is the ultimate currency, but it's a state monopoly.
Completely. It's an intellectual espionage operation. The benefits of this knowledge, the advanced technology, the longer life presumably trickle down to the population, but the knowledge itself, the understanding, the process, the authority that remains tightly controlled by the scientific elite in Solomon's house. The public are beneficiaries, not participants.
And this emphasis on purity and control isn't just intellectual, is it? Bacon emphasizes their morality, too.
Very much so. He describes Bensalem as extraordinarily chaste, a virgin of the world, and they strongly condemn what they see as European sexual permissiveness.
Why the focus on chastity in a scientific utopia? How does that connect?
Bacon links it directly to rationality and self-control. The people of Bensalem believe that unchastity prevents self-reverence, and self-reverence, they think, is second only to religion as the main restraint on vice.
So if you can't control your own basic desires, you can't be trusted. You're not rational enough.
Exactly. You're not fit for a society dedicated to the rational mastery of nature if you can't even master yourself. Moral predictability is required, just like scientific predictability. Control, whether it's in the laboratory or the bedroom, is the fundamental principle for Bacon. You get progress, you get order, but only if the keys are held by a disciplined, secretive, scientific elite. So if more focused on economics, Rousseau on politics, and Bacon on science, Tommaso Campanella, writing his City of the Sun while in prison, kind of throws everything into the pot. He creates this intense, centralized, theocratic commune. This might be the most total form of control we've seen yet.
The structure itself sounds unique. The ruler isn't a king or a president, but metaphysicus.
Yes, or metaphysicus. He's the chief magistrate, but also the chief priest. And the qualifications are staggering. He has to be an expert in, well, everything. Metaphysics, theology, cosmology, astrology, all sciences, all mechanical arts, history, politics. A true universal genius.
One person knows all that.
Ideally, yes. He's assisted by 3 co-rulers. Pan, representing power, deals with war and military. Sin, representing wisdom, oversees the sciences and arts, and More, representing love, focuses on generation, education, health. But Ho is the ultimate unifying intelligence.
And this absolute knowledge is supposed to guarantee his goodness.
That's the premise. The text explicitly says Ho is never cruel, nor wicked, nor a tyrant, inasmuch as he possesses so much wisdom. Perfect knowledge equals perfect rule. There's no check, no balance, just reliance on the ruler's supposed infallibility.
Okay, so how does this total knowledge get passed down to the citizens? Is it just through decrees from Ho?
It's much more pervasive than that. Campanella designs the city itself as an educational tool, a giant visual encyclopedia.
How does that work?
The city is built in concentric circles, 7 of them, named after the planets. And the walls of these circuits, both inside and out, are covered in paintings. These aren't just decorations. They depict everything. Mathematical figures, maps of every land, all the plants, animals, fish, minerals, inventions, founders of law and science.
So kids just learn by walking around and looking at the walls.
Exactly. They observe absorb the entire state-approved curriculum without toil and as if for pleasure from a very young age. It's learning by osmosis, completely controlled by the state. No need for private tutors, potentially subversive books, or independent thought. The environment is the ideology.
Total visual conditioning. And if education and knowledge are communal, I imagine the family structure follows suit.
Oh, it goes far beyond More's communal dining. Campanella completely abolishes the private family.
No families at all.
None in our sense. Dwellings, dormitories, food, everything is held in common. Possessions are minimal and distributed by magistrates. But the most radical aspect, the one that always shocks readers, is the control over reproduction.
This is the state-controlled breeding program.
Yes. Children are bred specifically for the Commonwealth, not for individual parents or families. The magistrates decide who mates with whom.
How do they decide?
Based on philosophical rules. They assess the physical and mental qualities of potential breeders. They even use astrology to determine the best times for conception, all aimed at producing the best possible offspring for the state. Eugenics, plain and simple.
And the idea of parents raising their own children.
Actively discouraged. Campanella argues that recognizing and raising your own offspring is actually unnatural because private individuals are usually driven by pride or ignorance and do a terrible job. The state, being rational and focused on the common good, can raise children far better. The individual body becomes a resource, a tool for species optimization managed by the state.
Compared to this, More's premarital inspections seem almost liberal. Here, the very idea of personal parenthood is deemed flawed.
Utterly. And this demand for total conformity, total order, extends right down to the most minute aspects of personal appearance.
Like what? No fashion choices.
Zero tolerance for personal vanity or deviation. The text gives these incredibly specific examples. If women dye their faces or wear high-heeled boots or long trains on their dresses...
What's the punishment? A fine. Public shaming.
Capital punishment.
Death for wearing high heels.
Death. Any attempt at individual distinction, even through something as trivial as cosmetics or fashion, is seen as a crime against the collective uniformity, a symptom of pride that must be stamped out immediately.
The level of control is breathtaking. And how is this extreme justice enforced? Who actually carries out these death sentences?
That's another chilling detail. They don't have professional executioners. If someone is condemned to death, the citizens themselves have to carry it out. Usually by stoning.
The whole community participates.
Yes. The accuser and the witnesses throw the first stones. The idea is that the community itself must purge the rotten member, taking collective responsibility for maintaining absolute purity and order.
So Campanella's City of the Sun achieves its ideal of perfect order through, well, the complete fusion of religion, science, and politics under one infallible leader, the total erasure of privacy and family, eugenics, and ruthless public enforcement of conformity, right down to your shoes.
That sums it up pretty well. It's perhaps the most extreme logical conclusion of the utopian desire for absolute predictable order.
Okay, so we've walked through these four incredibly powerful and often disturbing visions of the perfect society. More. Rousseau, Bacon, Campanella, whether they start from wanting economic justice or political legitimacy or scientific mastery or divine order, they all seem to arrive at a similar place.
They really do. And seeing them together like this in one collection highlights that common destination so clearly. The individual gets absorbed, optimized, controlled for the sake of the perfect system.
Let's try to crystallize that. Let's recap the core trade-off in each case. What was the goal and what liberty was sacrificed?
Okay. So with More's Utopia, the goal was primarily economic equality and survival. Basic needs met, no poverty, the cost. The abolition of private property, obviously, but also the loss of free movement, privacy, and even control over things like housing. Motivation is controlled by removing the objects of desire.
Then Rousseau's social contract. The goal there was political justice and legitimacy, the sovereignty of the people. But the price was that total alienation, giving up all individual rights to the collective, the general will. Freedom means conformity. Dissent, factions, even large, diverse societies become illegitimate.
Right. Then Bacon's New Atlantis prioritized order and progress through science. The trade-off. Power is concentrated in a secretive scientific elite, Solomon's house. The public gets the benefits of technology but loses access to the knowledge itself. Control comes through information monopoly, isolation, and strict moral codes to keep the machine running smoothly.
And finally, Campanella's City of the Sun aimed for divine perfection and total efficiency. And the price was, well, everything. The abolition of the family, state-controlled reproduction, eugenics, total lack of privacy, even control over appearance enforced by the community itself. Absolute order through the absolute subjugation of the individual body and mind.
So you see the pattern. Each thinker identifies a real problem: poverty, injustice, ignorance, chaos. But their solution, their attempt to engineer a perfect state free from that problem, inevitably requires them to eliminate the unpredictable, messy variable, human individuality.
Free will, private desires, personal attachments, the right to be different. These seem to be the enemies of the perfectly engineered society.
They have to be, from this perspective. For the machine to run perfectly, all the parts the citizens need to be standardized, predictable, interchangeable.
Yeah.
But that requires stripping away everything that makes us unique and, well, free in the way we usually think of freedom. The intention might be noble, aiming for a greater good.
But the blueprint ends up looking totalitarian.
Almost inevitably. Which raises that fundamental question these texts force us to confront. Can you actually build a good society purely through perfectly designed institutions? Or does a lasting free commonwealth depend more on cultivating virtue within imperfect humans?
That seems much harder.
Infinitely harder. And you see the authors wrestling with it. Rousseau needs his godlike legislator because he knows the people, left to themselves, won't just choose the general will. More relies on the utopians having this innate good conscience so they don't abuse the communal stores. If you can't assume perfect people,
then the perfect state needs perfect enforcement, absolute control.
Which is the opposite of freedom. It highlights the stark difference between designing a system to restrain the flaws in human nature, which often involves limiting power, and accepting imperfection.
Like the approach the American founders arguably took, trying to balance interests rather than eliminate them.
Versus designing a system to eradicate those flaws entirely by controlling every aspect of life. These utopias generally fall into that second category.
So this deep dive into ideal empires and republics really brings that tension into sharp focus. That dream of perfection, it often seems like it's just masking a deep fear of human fallibility, of messiness, of freedom itself.
It definitely makes you think about what we value most today. Are we striving for absolute efficiency, absolute safety, absolute equality, knowing the potential cost in terms of control, as these texts illustrate?
Or do we prioritize freedom, even knowing that freedom inevitably means allowing for imperfection, disagreement, inefficiency, and maybe even danger? It's not always a comfortable choice.
And that leads us to a final thought, something for you to really chew on, inspired by Rousseau. He made this sharp observation about radical change, saying that the work of legislation, of building a new society, is often made difficult, not so much by what must be established as by what must be destroyed.
Destroyed. What needs to be torn down first. Okay, so let's put that to you, the listener. If you were genuinely tasked right now with implementing one of these perfect empires, More's, Rousseau's, Bacon's, or Campanella's, what fundamental, ingrained part of modern human nature or modern life would you absolutely have to destroy first to make it work?
Think about it. Would it be our expectation of privacy, especially online? Would it be the deep, almost biological attachment we have to our own families, our own children? Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe it's just that relentless drive for self-interest that fuels so much of our economy. What have to go?
And maybe more importantly, as you said earlier, what would be left of us after that destruction? Grappling with these utopian visions, these ideal empires, is such a powerful way to understand the boundaries and maybe the value of our own imperfect freedoms.
It really puts our own world into perspective.
Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to The Deep Dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shape liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.